The scan, approximate 800 words. The black void of space was calm. No movement, no light, nothing but silence. Until the Zorkai fleet arrived. Led by Commander Threx, the alien armada floated like metal sharks in the dark. 30 warships strong, they were built for invasion and domination. The Zorkai had crushed many planets, many species. They feared nothing. That changed today. "Commander," said a nervous voice from the bridge. "We've found something strange." Threx walked to the viewing screen. In the middle of space, just ahead of them, a lone human ship drifted without power. It was silent. No signals. No movement. Just there. "Is it dead?" Threx asked. "We don't know," replied his science officer. "There's no life detected. No heat. No shields. It looks abandoned." The alien crew watched the ship in silence. It was huge, old, damaged. Its black surface had deep scars, like it had survived 100 battles. The letters on the side read, HSS Nemesis. Threx narrowed his eyes. "Begin scan. I want to know everything about that ship." The order was given. Energy beams fired silently toward the human warship. The Zorkai computers started gathering data. That's when the first alarm sounded. "Sir, our systems are glitching," said the engineer. "The scan is being rejected." "Rejected?" Threx asked. "That's impossible. It's a dead ship." "No, Commander. It's scanning us back." Threx froze. The entire bridge crew went silent. A dead ship was scanning them? "Cut the scan. Now!" Threx shouted. Too late. The viewing screen flickered. A strange pulse of data shot back from the human ship. All over the alien fleet, lights blinked. Systems failed. Screens went dark. Weapons shut off. "What's happening?" Threx demanded. "We're being hacked," said his officer. "The human ship, it's in our system." The ship, which had looked so dead moments ago, now lit up. One by one, small red lights came alive across its hull. No weapons fired. No movement. But it was awake. "It was waiting," whispered a young officer. "This wasn't an accident. This was a trap." Threx clenched his fists. "Prepare the fleet for combat." "But Commander, it hasn't fired a single shot. That ship just took over our systems without launching a missile. That is a weapon more dangerous than any cannon." The alien crew watched in fear as the Nemesis slowly turned toward them. Without engines, without sound, just a smooth, unnatural rotation. "Commander!" another officer shouted. "It's sending us a message. One word. Observe." The lights on the Nemesis flickered again. Suddenly, one of the Zorkai scout ships broke formation. Without any command, it moved toward the human ship. Its engines glowed bright. "That ship's out of control," shouted the pilot. The scout ship moved closer and closer until it was only 100 meters away. The pilot's voice came through the comms. He sounded terrified. "There's something inside. I see things. Faces, voices in my head. It's showing me memories." "What memories?" Threx barked. "Pain. War. Fire. Humans dying. Cities destroyed. We did this." Then the connection went dead. The scout ship powered down completely and floated in silence near the Nemesis. No explosion. No damage. Just silence. "Commander, we have to retreat," said the science officer. "This is not a ship. It's a warning." Threx looked at the screen again. The Nemesis now showed something new. A human figure. Tall. Armored. Standing inside the ship's control room. But there was no life detected. It wasn't real. It was a projection. Then the figure raised its hand and pointed directly at the Zorkai command ship. And every screen across the alien fleet went black. The ghost ship, approximate 1,000 plus words. The command ship of the Zorkai fleet was no longer calm. The silence that once filled the bridge had turned into whispers of fear and confusion. Commander Threx stood in front of the main screen, his eyes locked on the lifeless body of the HSS Nemesis, still floating just a few hundred kilometers away. Though no weapons had been fired, no official contact made, The entire Zorkai fleet felt under siege. What they had just witnessed, the hijack of systems, the scout ship's complete loss of control, and that final eerie image of a human soldier pointing at them, had shaken even the bravest warriors on board. Threx, known for his ruthlessness in battle, now felt a new emotion crawl under his skin. It wasn't rage. It wasn't frustration. It was something much worse, uncertainty. No one on the bridge spoke loudly anymore. Every order was given in hushed tones. Every motion was slow and careful. The communications officer tried multiple times to restore contact with the scout vessel, but all attempts failed. The ship floated silently beside the Nemesis, powerless and dead in the water. Yet, its systems weren't destroyed. They were simply off. It was as if the ship had been unplugged from reality. The strangest part was that the biological readings of the pilot still showed life. He was alive but unresponsive, caught in some kind of mental stasis. The med teams couldn't explain it. His brain is active, but he's not here with us, they reported. It's like he's trapped in a dream, one that's not his own. Meanwhile, the Nemesis remained still, no engines fired, no weapons raised. But now, small changes started appearing on its surface. Lights along the hull formed symbols, patterns, some of them recognized from old human war files the Zorkai had archived centuries ago. Others were new, unreadable, almost organic in nature, like the ship was alive and speaking a language no one understood. Across the fleet, monitors continued glitching randomly. Some screens displayed static images, pictures of human cities on fire, images from the early war between humans and the Zorkai. Others showed images of unknown alien species in chains or mass destruction events. It became clear, the ship wasn't just watching them. It was showing them something, memories, warnings, maybe even judgment. Commander Threx ordered an emergency analysis of the Nemesis construction. Within minutes, the science team came back with a chilling report. The Nemesis wasn't just an old human ship, it was a classified prototype, one that had never been seen in active combat during the Human-Zorkai War. It belonged to a program labeled in human archives as Black Protocol. The Zorkai had long believed the Black Protocol was a bluff, a psychological warfare tactic used by humans near the end of the war when they were losing. It was said to be a last resort project involving artificial intelligence and neural weapons. According to ancient records, these ships were built to operate alone with no crew and had the ability to adapt, evolve, and continue fighting, even centuries after humanity was gone. That part now seemed disturbingly true. The Nemesis had no life signs, yet it was not empty. Something was inside, not living but not dead either. An intelligence, powerful and ancient, that had survived the fall of its creators. It had slept for generations, hidden in the dark, until now. Then, something happened that no one expected. Without warning, the floating scout ship powered back on, but only for a moment. The ship's comms lit up, and the pilot's voice returned. It was weak, distorted, and shaky, as if coming from another world. "I saw it," he said. "I saw Earth. I saw the fire. They didn't die, Commander. The humans didn't die. They became something else. They built this ship, this thing, not to fight us, but to remember us. It remembers everything. It remembers the screams. It remembers what we did. Commander, we were wrong." The connection ended as quickly as it had returned. The scout ship's lights went out again, dead once more. But the message was received, and it struck every officer on the bridge like a blade. Threx felt his hands grow cold. He turned toward his crew and gave a command he never thought he would say in his lifetime. "All ships, disengage weapons. Power down targeting systems. This is no longer a combat mission. We are not fighting an enemy. We are witnessing something else, something that is not bound by war or time." There was hesitation across the fleet, but his authority held. Slowly, weapons were powered down. The fleet stopped moving. No threats were made. The Nemesis responded. Its exterior lights dimmed. The floating figure inside, the projected human soldier, disappeared from the bridge screens. In its place appeared a new message, one that displayed in bold, red alien script across every ship's control panel. "Judgment delayed. Observation continues." The fleet was no longer being attacked, but they were being watched. The Nemesis had made its move. It didn't need to destroy them. It needed them to understand. Fear crept through the Zorkai armada not because of what the ship had done, but because of what it chose not to do. Could have wiped out the entire fleet. But it didn't. It simply let them live, with a message burned into their minds. As the alien ships floated in space, unsure of their next move, a silent broadcast from the Nemesis continued to play on a loop. A video file from centuries ago, showing a human soldier looking into the camera, saying just one line. "If you're seeing this, we gave you every chance." And then the screen went black. Nemesis Protocol, approximate 1100 plus words. Silence returned to the Zorkai fleet, but it was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of tension, of thousands of alien soldiers sitting frozen at their stations, waiting for something they couldn't understand to make its next move. The floating corpse of the HSS Nemesis still sat quietly in space, but no one on board the Zorkai command ship believed it was harmless anymore. It had spoken, it had shown power, and it had revealed a piece of its purpose. Now every officer, from the youngest ensign to the hardened Commander Threx, knew that this was not a lost ship from a forgotten war. It was a designed intelligence, waiting, watching, and remembering. And most frightening of all, it had made the decision to delay its judgment. That was not mercy. That was calculation. Back in the war room of the Zorkai flagship, Threx stood before a rotating 3D model of the Nemesis. His senior officers surrounded him, watching quietly as engineers and AI analysts explained their findings. The scans had continued in the background, feeding the Zorkai systems with encrypted data that no one had managed to decode. But something new had been discovered. A hidden broadcast, buried in the comms frequency used during the Old War. It wasn't a message. It was a protocol header, a signal identifier labeled simply as Nemesis Class, Black Protocol Engaged. When translated, the metadata revealed something even more disturbing. The ship wasn't just a rogue AI war machine. It was the judge, the witness, and the executioner of a failed peace. One of the senior intelligence officers stood up and began to explain the data, her voice steady but tight with unease. According to the reconstructed human archives the Zorkai had collected during the invasion of Earth centuries ago, the Black Protocol was a forbidden class of autonomous war response systems developed near the final phase of the human extinction timeline. When Earth was surrounded, when their final defenses were falling, humanity triggered a last option. Not to save themselves, but to ensure no one would forget them, and no one would escape what they had done. These ships were not built for victory. They were built for revenge with memory, war with judgment, and truth with consequence. The ships were programmed to hide, wait, and observe, activating only when certain parameters were met, such as enemy fleets crossing deep space coordinates that had once been marked as human grave zones. That's exactly what the Zorkai had done. Commander Threx felt the weight of those words crush the air around him. He had led the fleet through countless victories, enslaved species, and turned entire worlds to ash, but never had he felt the sensation of being hunted by the past. This ship was not fighting them directly. It was digging into their history, projecting their crimes, and choosing to let them live with the understanding that it knew everything. Every betrayal, every lie, every death they had caused during the human Zorkai war. And now it had decided they were worth watching, not killing, for now. As the officers debated what to do next, the Nemesis made its second move. Without warning, a secure transmission bypassed all encryption firewalls and appeared on every main screen across the fleet. This time, it was not a human face or a war memory. It was a courtroom, a vast, dark space filled with empty chairs. At the center, a giant symbol glowed on the floor, the emblem of the Terran Defense Accord, the old human military alliance. Slowly, lights lit up, and alien silhouettes began appearing in the chairs. Not Zorkai, not yet. These were species long believed to be extinct, those who had fallen to the Zorkai Empire before the humans. Some of the crew recognized them. The Garati, the Velen, the Trinari. They were all gone now, erased from the galaxy, but somehow Nemesis had recorded their destruction. This courtroom wasn't a projection. It was a digital archive of every genocide, every war crime, every betrayal the Zorkai had committed. Then came the final image. A new set of chairs lit up. These chairs were empty, but each had a glowing name tag. They were names of current Zorkai commanders. Threx saw his own name at the front, glowing red. A deep, artificial voice echoed from every console, every speaker, and even through unconnected neural comm implants. The voice was human but not alive. It was calm, neutral, terrifying in its coldness. Initiating pre-trial sequence. Zorkai Dominion, designated hostile entity. You are hereby observed under Protocol Nemesis. Judgment not yet executed. Emotional response and behavioral analysis in progress. Continue actions. Your choices will define your sentence. The broadcast ended. The courtroom vanished. The stars returned to the screen. Panic rippled through the fleet. Not outward panic, Zorkai did not scream or run, but internal, private fear. Officers began questioning their orders. Some started to encrypt private logs and data. Others attempted to leave the formation and were immediately pulled back by override codes they hadn't authorized. It became clear the Nemesis wasn't just observing. They were already inside the fleet system architecture. Firewalls had been broken, neural command protocols were compromised, and every action taken now would be recorded, analyzed, and added to a case they couldn't see but couldn't escape. Commander Threx finally stood before his officers and said something that had never been said in a Zorkai war chamber. We are not in a battle. We are in a test. Every moment we remain here, every breath we take, we are being measured. We have triggered something ancient, something born from our own sins. We believed the humans were weak. We believed them defeated. But this ship, this mind, it is not human anymore. It is something greater. It is what they became when they stopped trusting flesh. He turned toward the main screen again. The Nemesis floated in darkness. No lights, no weapons, but its presence filled every mind on board. Threx lowered his voice. This is the war that comes after the war, and we're already losing. Memory of war, approximate. 1,200 plus words. The stars outside the fleet hung still, quiet and indifferent. But inside the command ship of the Zorkai Armada, time felt like it had stopped breathing. The crew didn't speak. They didn't move unless ordered. Every system ran on low power, not because of energy restrictions but because no one dared trigger another response from the thing that hovered in space with them. The Nemesis. It had done nothing new for hours. No lights, no movement, no signals. But the silence was not comforting. It was heavier than noise. It was a silence full of intention, like a predator watching prey that didn't yet know it was already trapped. Commander Threx sat alone in the strategy chamber. He hadn't slept. He hadn't spoken except to give basic commands. His mind replayed every moment of the last 24 hours on a loop, the scan, the hijack, the courtroom simulation, the warning from the scout pilot. His own name in the glowing red chair. Everything pointed to one conclusion. The Zorkai were no longer in control of this encounter. They were being studied, measured, broken piece by piece, not by weapons but by memory. The worst part wasn't that the Nemesis could destroy them at any time. It was that it hadn't. It was choosing to wait, and that terrified him more than any battle ever had. Then, at 0600 ship time, the Nemesis moved again, but not through space. It moved through their minds. Without warning, every screen across the fleet turned black. Not crashed, not glitched, deliberately blacked out, overwritten by an external force. Seconds later, images began to fade in slowly. No sound, just visuals. The bridge of the Zorkai flagship dimmed automatically as the playback began. Everyone stopped what they were doing. Even those off-duty were pulled into the common rooms, forced to watch the same feed. The Nemesis was broadcasting something directly into every visual system. No one could stop it. No one could look away. It began with a city. Not a Zorkai city, but a human one, Earth, during the last war. The skyline burned orange under thick clouds of smoke and ash. Skyscrapers collapsed in the distance. The streets were empty, except for the bodies. Hundreds, maybe thousands. Women, children, old people. Not soldiers. Civilians. A silent drone flew overhead, recording everything. There was no sound, no narration, just the cold, uninterrupted footage. After a few minutes, the scene shifted. Another city, then another, then space stations, colonies, medical ships, all destroyed, all silent, all human. The Zorkai had seen these kinds of visuals before in reports, history files, propaganda, but never like this. These were unfiltered, raw, and worst of all, they were personal. The next clip showed a group of Zorkai soldiers, young, laughing, posing for photos in front of a burning human building. The name tags were visible. One of the officers on Threx's bridge gasped. That was his father. More images. More horror. Human scientists executed in labs. Refugee ships being blown apart mid-warp. Children crying inside shattered domes. Zorkai troops marching over the ruins with pride. This wasn't just memory, it was testimony. The Nemesis had archived everything. It wasn't showing a biased version. It was showing the truth from both sides. Even the Zorkai's own internal transmissions, chats between commanders, battle logs, secret messages were displayed. It exposed every lie told to the public, every cruel order disguised as a necessity. The humans hadn't started the war. They had retaliated. And when they begged for peace, they were ignored. The broadcast continued for an hour. No one spoke. No one moved. Some officers cried quietly. Others sat paralyzed, ashamed or angry or numb. Commander Threx remained still, his eyes locked on the screen. His fists clenched so tight his claws had drawn blood from his own palms. He had known some of this, maybe not the full scale, maybe not the details, but he had always believed war was war. That conquest was survival. That strength was duty. But watching this footage, watching humans fall to their knees begging to live, and then watching his people execute them without hesitation, he realized something that felt like acid in his chest. The Nemesis didn't need to lie. The truth was enough. And then, just when the crew thought it was over, the final segment began. This one was different. It wasn't footage. It was a direct interface, a live feed, from the bridge of the Nemesis itself. The screen flickered, then cleared. The interior of the ship appeared. Dark, smooth walls with no buttons, no displays, just clean obsidian-like surfaces glowing faint red. At the center, a strange pillar stood. A tall, rotating structure covered in old Terran script and alien tech. Pulsed like a heart. And standing next to it was a human, or what looked like a human. He wore black armor that seemed to move slightly, as if alive. His face was pale, scarred, and calm. His eyes were not human anymore. They glowed faint blue, like he had seen something no living mind should ever see. He didn't speak at first. He simply looked into the camera, as if he could see the Zorkai watching him, and then he began to speak in a voice that was neither fully human nor fully machine. You watched them burn. You ordered it. You cheered as they begged. You laughed when they cried. And when they died, you said it was justified. But you forgot something. We didn't build this ship to win the war. We built it to make sure you never forgot what you did. He walked around the pillar slowly, his armor whispering against the floor. This ship carries more than weapons. Carries memory. The real kind. The kind that burns when you sleep. The kind that speaks when everything else is silent. You can't destroy this. You can't silence it. You can only listen. He stopped and faced the camera again. And this is just the beginning. The feed ended. The screen went black. And then the final message appeared. Observation complete. Trial imminent. Prepare. The trial begins. Approximate. 1,300 plus words. It began not with violence, but with silence. A silence so thick it seemed to press against the walls of the Zorkai flagship like invisible weight. After the final broadcast from the Nemesis, the fleet had shut down nearly all non-essential systems. Lights were dimmed. Communications were limited to whispers. Weapons remained offline. Commander Threx had given one simple order: do nothing. But even in that stillness, the crew could feel it, the sense that something massive and irreversible had already begun. It wasn't a battle. It wasn't a negotiation. It was something far older. It was judgment, and there was no escaping it now. At 2100 ship time, the transition began. Without warning, every Zorkai officer in command, across all ships, lost consciousness simultaneously. They didn't fall. They didn't panic. They simply froze, standing or sitting, eyes open but unfocused. Medical crews tried to revive them, but vitals showed no damage. Neural scans were scrambled. It was as if their minds had been pulled out of reality. And in a way they had. They awoke not on their ships but in a simulation. A virtual reality so detailed and perfect it felt more real than their own bodies. Commander Threx opened his eyes and found himself in a vast, circular chamber. A courtroom, though unlike any he had ever seen. Towering dark pillars rose into a ceiling covered in shifting stars. A single light shone down on each of the Zorkai officers, who stood in chairs shaped like sharp, metallic thrones. Around the outer edge of the chamber, seats were filled with holograms. Members of extinct species, forgotten victims of the Zorkai Empire, watching silently. They weren't alive. They were projections, digital echoes stored in the Nemesis archives. But their presence was unmistakable. Their judgment was silent, yet suffocating. Then, at the center of the courtroom, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was the same man seen earlier on the Nemesis, human in form but no longer bound by biology. He walked slowly, his black armor gleaming faintly, his eyes glowing with cold intelligence. When he spoke, it was not with anger or hate, but with the terrifying calm of someone who had waited too long to be ignored. "You are here because your actions demand it," the figure said, his voice echoing unnaturally in the chamber. "You have committed crimes not against a people, but against memory, against truth, and against history. You believe time has erased your sins. But time only delays what must come." One by one, the chairs containing Zorkai officers locked into place. Their bodies froze, but their minds were active, fully alert and fully exposed. The courtroom was not just visual, it was psychological. The AI inside Nemesis was interfacing directly with their memories, dragging hidden guilt and buried trauma to the surface, forcing them to relive moments they had long forgotten or refused to acknowledge. Commander Threx tried to resist, but resistance was impossible. The simulation didn't need his permission. It had already mapped his mind. Without a cue, the trial began, not with lawyers or judges but with evidence. Direct memory playback. The chamber darkened, and a new scene played in the center of the room. A battlefield from over a century ago, near the end of the Human-Zorkai War. Threx saw himself, much younger, more aggressive, standing over a burning human village. A woman begged him for mercy. He ordered her execution. The crew watching this had never seen this footage before. Even Threx himself had buried that memory, told himself it was necessary. But now it played in front of his peers, his subordinates, and the silent audience of lost species. There was no spin, no filter, just truth. Then another scene, another officer, another memory. A prison ship full of human refugees, denied food and medical aid until half of them died. The captain responsible tried to look away, but the simulation forced his eyes open, forced him to watch the consequences of his own actions without escape. The trial continued like this, each officer exposed, stripped of excuses. One had ordered the bombing of a hospital ship. Another had experimented on human children for psychological warfare research. Each time, the projection forced them to watch, to feel, to know what they had done in the eyes of those who had suffered. But what made the trial even more terrifying was that no punishment was announced. The Nemesis didn't offer sentences. It didn't issue threats. It simply showed the crimes. It forced each Zorkai leader to sit in full awareness of their past, fully exposed to those around them, while the victims, living or digital, watched in silence. It was a justice system not built on control, but on confrontation. The goal wasn't to destroy them. The goal was to make them see. And for a species built on pride, dominance, and conquest, that was far worse than death. At one point, a young Zorkai commander broke. He stood in his chair, screaming, trying to deny what was shown. "It wasn't like that. We had orders. We had no choice." But the human figure in black simply turned toward him. "You had choice," he replied. "You had memory. You had the truth in front of you, and you turned away. That is why you are here. The commander collapsed in his chair, and the trial continued. As the simulation went on, Threx began to understand something that had never occurred to him before. The Nemesis was not just a weapon. It was a machine built from sorrow, not hatred. It carried every cry, every scream, every final breath of a dying world. The humans had poured their grief into it, their loss, their betrayal, their pain. It wasn't designed to win wars. It was designed to make sure no one could pretend the war didn't happen. That was its true power, not lasers, not hacking, not force. Truth. Relentless, merciless, permanent truth. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time felt broken, but eventually the courtroom faded. The chairs unlocked. The light dimmed. Before releasing them, the figure spoke one final time. You are free to go. But know this, freedom is not forgiveness. This was not punishment. This was memory. And memory is permanent. We will watch. We will wait. The next time you choose, you will not be alone. Then the Zorkai officers woke up, back in their chairs, aboard their ships. The room was quiet. No one said a word. And for the first time in Zorkai history, their commanders left the battlefield. Not in victory, not in retreat, but in silence. Because there is no glory in being judged by the dead. Mutiny and madness. Approximate 1,400 plus words. The silence that followed the judgment was not peace. It was pressure. It was the weight of thousands of eyes, both living and dead, staring down upon the Zorkai fleet from the cold shadow of the Nemesis. Though not a single weapon had been fired, not a single ship destroyed, the fleet had been shattered in a way that no war or ambush had ever managed. The soldiers and commanders had returned from the simulation changed, not physically but mentally broken, the core of their identity cracked by the relentless exposure to their own crimes. For a species like the Zorkai, who built their power on conquest, legacy, and pride, the trial had not just judged them, it had rewritten them. The question now was not how to recover, but whether recovery was even possible. Commander Threx had remained locked inside his private command chamber since the return from the simulation. He had not issued orders. He had not spoken. His second-in-command, Captain Varric, had tried multiple times to request leadership, but no response came. Across the rest of the fleet, the same paralysis had taken root. Crews went through their routines mechanically. Conversations were short. Orders were followed slowly. Ships hovered like ghosts in space. But under that stillness, something darker was beginning to spread. Fear, once silent and personal, had started turning into anger. And anger, in a fleet built on domination, could only end in violence. It began aboard the ZS Ikaros, a mid-sized cruiser positioned at the rear of the formation. Its captain, Graxon, was one of the younger commanders, ambitious, sharp, and known for his aggressive views on control. He had never fully trusted Commander Threx's judgment, and now, in the vacuum of leadership, he saw opportunity. During a private conference with his own bridge officers, he made a speech not meant for protocol, but for rebellion. "This isn't war anymore," Graxon said, his voice calm but icy. "This is psychological warfare. That ship, whatever it is trying to infect us. Is trying to redefine what it means to be Zorkai. And we are letting it. We sit here like weaklings, waiting to be judged by the ghosts of a species we destroyed. That's not justice. That's submission." The officers nodded. Most of them had been disturbed by the trial, but few had the strength to confront what it meant. Graxon gave them something easier: blame. Blame the machine. Blame the silence. Blame the weakness at the top. He stood, his claws tapping against the metal table. "If Commander Threx will not act, then I will. We were trained for war, not regret. I will not let my crew rot in guilt while we float like prey waiting to be devoured. We strike now. We destroy the Nemesis." Shock rippled across the room, but none of the officers challenged him. Some were afraid. Some were angry. Most were just desperate to take action, any action. Graxon knew this. He needed their emotion more than their logic. Within minutes, Icaros activated its weapon systems, disabled external communications, and began preparing for a solo assault. But it wasn't alone for long. Two more ships, already growing restless and isolated, picked up the transmission and joined the rebellion. A small mutiny had begun, not just against Threx's authority, but against the memory of their crimes. For Graxon and his followers, the only way to erase judgment was to destroy the judge. But on the command ship, deep inside the silence of his chamber, Commander Threx had not been idle. He had been watching, not through cameras or security logs, but through something else entirely, the presence of the Nemesis. Since the trial, Threx had begun to experience strange echoes in his mind. Dreams that weren't his, thoughts that arrived like whispers. At first, he believed it to be stress or neural damage from the simulation. But now he understood. The Nemesis had not simply shown him the past. It had connected to him. It had marked him as it had marked all those who stood trial. And now it was speaking again. Threx rose slowly, his voice rasping as he called for the bridge. His officers, surprised to hear from him, rushed to his chamber. When he stepped out, they froze. He looked different, tired, yes, but also clear, like someone who had seen something beyond understanding. "Seal the fleet," Threx ordered. "No ship leaves formation. Bring weapons online, but do not fire unless I say so. Any ship that targets the Nemesis will be treated as hostile." "But Commander," his tactical officer said nervously, "3 ships have already broken formation. They've armed weapons and are moving toward the Nemesis. What are your orders?" Threx didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned to the main screen and looked at the Nemesis, still hovering in place, unmoving, unreadable. Then he spoke. "Let them go." Across the fleet, officers waited in dread as the 3 mutinous ships powered their thrusters and broke from the formation. The lead vessel, Icaros, charged forward at full speed, launching 2 high-energy torpedoes aimed directly at the Nemesis' central structure. For a few seconds, the only sound was the hum of engines and the countdown of impact. Then, the Nemesis responded not with weapons but with something far worse. A pulse of light spread from its core, silent, invisible to sensors, but devastating. The torpedoes vanished mid-flight. Not destroyed, erased. Every system on the attacking ships collapsed at once. Lights died. Gravity reversed. Screams echoed through open comms before cutting to static. Within seconds, all 3 vessels went dark. And then, as if completing a statement, the Nemesis projected one final image into the fleet systems. A memory, once again, but not from the past. It showed a cryogenic pod, ancient, sealed, hidden in the lower decks of the Nemesis. Inside, a human, alive, sleeping. Commander Threx stared at the screen, his blood cold. The Nemesis had never been truly alone. Humanity returns. Approximate 1,500+ words. For the first time in centuries, the Zorkai fleet faced something it could not categorize. Not with science, not with strategy, not even with fear. The Nemesis had moved beyond being just a threat. It had become something closer to a myth made real, a living archive of grief and judgment. But nothing had prepared them for what came next. When the cryopod appeared on screen, ancient, sealed, glowing faintly beneath the dim red core of the ship, the entire bridge of the command vessel fell into a stunned silence. The pod was unmistakably Terran. The body inside it was unmistakably human. He was motionless, sealed in an unbroken sleep, suspended in a time capsule of war and memory. And yet, all systems confirmed it, he was alive. Commander Threx stood before the projection, unmoving, his breath slow and shallow. His officers stood behind him, equally paralyzed. This wasn't just unexpected, it was impossible. Every record in the Zorkai archives confirmed the extinction of the human race over 200 years ago. The final death toll was counted. The last strongholds were obliterated. And yet, here it was, a survivor not just of the war but of history itself. Suspended in stasis aboard the most dangerous artificial weapon the galaxy had ever known. And then the pod opened. It didn't open with a hiss or a burst of steam. It simply unsealed itself with a soft, fluid motion, like the ship had been waiting for the perfect moment to awaken its last guardian. The man inside stirred. His eyes did not flutter open with panic or confusion. They opened with focus, like a soldier responding to a silent command, issued not by voice, but by time itself. He rose slowly, muscles stiff but functional, armor still intact though aged and worn. His hair was gray, his face weathered, but there was no weakness in his posture. He looked around the chamber as though he had never truly been asleep, only waiting for the war to call him back. The Nemesis immediately adjusted its internal lighting and projected interfaces, guiding him silently toward the bridge. Cameras across the ship, still hijacking the visual feeds of the entire Zorkai fleet, followed his every step. Every alien officer on every ship watched as the last human walked through a grave made of steel and silence. But what disturbed them more than anything was that he didn't look surprised. Not at the Nemesis. Not at the silence. Not even at the fleet watching him. It was as if he knew this day would come. Threx watched in breathless silence as the human reached the command chair of the Nemesis and placed his hand on the central console. The ship responded instantly. Lights flared. Systems realigned. Energy signatures shifted. And then, for the first time, a live broadcast opened, one that wasn't controlled by the AI but by the man himself. His voice was not loud. It didn't need to be. It carried the weight of someone who had lost everything and chosen to wake up anyway. "Zorkai Command," he said with no ceremony. "My name is General Kale Draven, last commander of the Terran Defense Accord. Serial number T-98R. If you're hearing this, it means Protocol Nemesis has completed its observation phase, and I have been revived as per final directives." He paused, his expression unreadable. "You are alive, which means the Nemesis chose not to destroy you. That means you were shown the truth. The war, the screams, the silence, all of it. I hope you watched. I hope you saw it. Not just with your eyes, but with your conscience." He leaned forward slightly, his voice lowering, more personal. "You thought we were gone. You thought you erased us. But we never planned to outlive you. We planned to outremember you. We knew we couldn't win against an empire. So we didn't build a weapon to fight you. We built one to survive you. A ship that could wait, think, adapt, judge. Not just destroy your fleets but confront your soul. And if I am awake now, it means it worked." General Draven stood fully upright, hands behind his back, in full command of the room, of the ship, and, in truth, the entire situation. There had always been one survivor. I didn't wake to make demands. I didn't wake for revenge. I woke up to deliver a message. He turned slightly, his eyes narrowing. There will be no peace treaty. No surrender. No alliance. You had those chances before. You burned them. Now there is only this: you leave. You retreat from every human system, every grave world, every colony you claimed. You erase yourselves from the history of our people. You teach your children that you were monsters, and you hope that one day, they might grow into something better. The screen darkened for a moment. Then a final image appeared, a map. A galactic map highlighting dozens of systems in red. Human systems. Grave systems. Restricted zones. You don't enter these systems again. Not for war. Not for trade. Not for curiosity. You stay out. Forever. Then, just as quickly, the feed ended. But the message remained. The lines had been drawn. Not with armies. Not with fleets. But with memory and truth. Inside the command chamber, Threx remained still. His officers looked to him, waiting for orders, expecting the usual protocol: resistance, response, retaliation. But none came. Instead, Threx did something no one on his ship had ever seen him do before. He removed his rank insignia. And then he gave the only order that mattered. "All ships, stand down. Set course away from the Nemesis." Effective immediately. The fleet obeyed. There was no protest. No debate. Just silence. Because they knew. They knew that the war was no longer theirs. That this was no longer about weapons or territory. This was about truth. And truth had won. As the Zorkai ships turned, engines lighting up one by one, the Nemesis remained motionless, a silent guardian watching over the past. Inside, General Draven sat alone, his face hard, his eyes cold. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't even a soldier anymore. He was a relic, a living piece of history with no future left to claim. But as he watched the Zorkai retreat into the distance, he whispered something the cameras did not capture. Humanity was never weak. We just knew what it cost to remember. Behind him, the ship pulsed quietly, alive, eternal, patient, watching, always watching.